Now, I don't know how many of you read the New York Daily News. I don't recommend mainstream media very often. But today, the New York Daily News had a headline that said, "President goes postal." It detailed the story of how, a few days before Christmas, the President of the United States signed a Postal Reform Act and then issued a signing statement in which he declared that he now has the power to open and read the mail of every American citizen. Read the Daily News. I'm not making this up. But I will tell you something. That signing statement is not the statement of a servant of the American people, a mere servant of the American people. That signing statement is the statement of a monarch.
King George!
We fought against monarchy in this country. And understand this. There will be those who tell you in the weeks and months ahead, as the organic process of impeachment proceeds through investigations by Congress, demands for accountability by the people, and a slow creeping toward that point where Nancy Pelosi is proven wrong and impeachment is put back on the table, there will be those who tell you impeachment is a constitutional crisis. They will be lying to you. Impeachment is not a constitutional crisis. Impeachment is a constitutional cure. To suggest that impeachment is a constitutional crisis would be like suggesting that aspirin is a headache crisis. The fact of the matter is, when you get a headache, you take the aspirin. When you get a constitutional crisis, you take the heroic medicine of impeachment. Now, in 1787, when this country finally got around, and it took a little time, when we finally got around to writing a constitution, the founders, imperfect men that they were, set out to do a couple of very simple things. One, to assure that no one man could ever lead this country into war on his own. They wanted to chain the dogs of war. And two, to assure that if a president did that, that the people and their Congress would have the tool to remove him, not at the next election, but at the next possible moment. George Mason, not just a college basketball team, but in fact, the author of the Bill of Rights, the critical author of the key components of the Constitution, said, "No point in this document is of more importance than that the right of impeachment should be continued. It answers the eternal question, shall any man be above justice?" James Madison, the man whose notes are the essential building block of our understanding of the Constitution, the fourth President of the United States, said it may perhaps on some occasion be found necessary to impeach the President himself. Fear not this moment. It is what we fought for. We struggled to end the period in our history where the people could not remove a monarch or a king. We did not fight to establish a new royalty. Amen. There are those who will say, how do we understand, when do we impeach? It's so unclear. High crimes and misdemeanors. Surely a high crime, I can understand that. That would be like being the CEO of a major corporation, getting the contracts to build the forward bases in a war on terror for that corporation, and then reaping stock options for yourself, Mr. Halliburton, CEO. And a misdemeanor, well, certainly a misdemeanor, that would be like, I don't know, shooting your hunting buddy in the face. But how do we reconcile them? The founders didn't say that you had to reconcile them. They said, we want you to know that as broad as you can imagine the wrongdoing of the president, that is the turf on which you can impeach. They did not want it to be narrowed, but they did tell us when to impeach. They were very clear about when it was absolutely necessary for citizens to act, and that was in a time of war. Madison and Jefferson were clear in this. They wrote back and forth to each other at the time of the Constitutional Convention about the necessity of chaining the dogs of war. Madison knew exactly why. He said, no nation can preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare, because war is, in fact, the true nurse of executive aggrandizement. In a time of war, a president will seize powers unto himself. He will use those powers to maintain and expand his power. He will take away all of our liberties if we do not challenge him. This understanding of impeachment as the necessary tool for removing an errant executive was writ large across the early history of the United States. When this country entered into the most criminal war of its long history of many criminal wars, certainly the most criminal war before the current one in which we are engaged, and that was the invasion of Mexico by James K. Polk, for the purpose, Polk was a slave owner, for the purpose of extending the slave power. He wanted to seize Mexican territory, turn those territories into states because they were below the Mason-Dixon line, to make them slave states, so that forever the eternal sin, the original sin of the American experiment, human bondage, would be continued. The most immoral of wars. A young congressman came to Washington, elected on an anti-war ticket in 1846. He demanded to know whether Polk had lied about the reasons for going to war. Polk had said American blood had been shed. This congressman went daily to the floor of the Congress of the United States and put down a spot resolution. It simply asked, "Show me, Mr. President, the spot on which a single drop of American blood was shed by a Mexican." When Polk did not respond, this congressman and the former President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, began the process of moving to censure and impeach James K. Polk for crimes against the Republic. The young congressman's law partner wrote him a letter saying, "You cannot do this, our troops are in the field. It is a time of war, you cannot question the commander-in-chief." The young congressman wrote back to his friend, "The provision of the Constitution giving the war-making power to Congress was dictated, as I understand it, by the following reasons. Kings had always been involving and impoverishing their people in wars, pretending generally, if not always, that the good of the people was the object. This, our convention understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions, and they resolved to so frame the Constitution that no one man should have the power of bringing this oppression upon the United States. Your suggestions that presidents must be allowed to make war as they choose and to go unquestioned and unchallenged during the course of that war destroys the whole matter of the American experiment. It places presidents where kings have always stood. And I will not put our president there or our republic in that circumstance. Sincerely, Abraham Lincoln." Is good enough for Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, then it is good enough for me. Impeach the president, impeach the vice president, change this administration, redeem this republic. Thank you.